One of the creepiest encounters I've ever had in my life was with the man in the blue truck. Although I didn't know it then, it would turn out to be an extremely scary memory. It happened when I was still a child. I was then a Girl Scout selling cookies in the neighborhood suburbs. It was a quiet neighborhood. We didn't have much visitors, and everyone more or less knew me as the cookie plug. I was saving up for one very important item. I can't remember, a dress or something. I needed to clear every batch of cookies available. The business was moving slowly in my end of town, so I decided to branch out and see if I could peddle my cookies at the second town close to ours. It was almost the worst mistake of my life. My trip into town was a huge success. I sold out all of my cookies. I was riding back, exhilarated at my sales, when a minor disaster struck. My bicycle got a flat tire. Disappointed but not dismayed, I started walking back with the punctured bicycle in tow. I was for a while unmindful of the whole hullabaloo, but after some time, the sun beating down on me sapped my goodwill. Then, like a shining knight, he came. A man with a heavy-set Ford Jeep with enough space at the back for my bicycle parked at my side. He leaned over the passenger side, opened the door, and asked me to hop in. Now, in today's world, such an invitation would be viewed at with the gravest suspicion. But it was 1991, and the whole kidnapping terror business had not yet become a wide phenomenon. Although initially I was a bit weary, the heat of the sun, my general exhaustion, and the temptation of getting home early finally won me over. I put my bicycle in the back, clambered onto the Ford, and on we went. Despite the countless interrogations that followed, I could not particularly describe him. He seemed a genial, kind, middle-aged man who was just happening to pass by and decided to help a stranded girl with a lift. Nothing about him indicated he was what they said he was. To me, he seemed like a good man, a savior even. We talked about trivial things, the weather, cupcakes, anything. He asked me why I was so far from town. I explained to him my dress situation and how I had finally saved enough to buy. He laughed and said he had a daughter exactly my age, who also bought that very dress a week ago. In fact, the very shop where it was being bought was just a few miles into town. Would I like to go see? He asked. I said yes, excitedly. Remember, this was the small town 90s. Men who abducted little girls just didn't exist in my reality. They did in the real world, though, and I was saved from finding out only by sheer luck. After agreeing to check out the dress store with the man, the strangest of things happened. His car ran out of fuel. I thought it was a bummer at the time, and when he pulled over, it just happened to coincide with Mrs. Sophie, my neighbor who also drove a Ford, pulling up to the gas station. Once she recognized me and perhaps the potential danger of the situation, she had the good sense to insist I came home in her car. Any protest of mine fell on deaf ears. I thanked him, asked him to describe the store, and he left. He let me go without any complaint. And that, to me, seemed to be the end of it. Only it was not, because again he picked up another stranded girl my age while passing by. The girl this time, however, unfortunately didn't have the good fortune to be saved by an empty fuel tank and a neighbor at the right place and the right time. The girl, Joyce, was missing, kidnapped for 2 weeks, and later found murdered and defiled. Witness reports last saw her entering the man's car, but for a twist of fate, I would have been her. That was the scariest near-kidnap experience I had ever had in my entire life. You'll have to forgive me. I don't remember this story exactly. It happened a long time ago, and I kept it buried for a while. No one likes to remember the worst 5 days of their life, after all. It happened during my working years. I was a banker, not too prosperous, but not doing badly either. I had a wife and 2 kids, had recently moved to a nice little house with a good mortgage, and I had gotten a handsomely sized raise at work. I guess you could say life was good, until one day, the strangest of all things happened. I was coming from work, walking towards my car. The parking lot was fairly deserted, as it always was. I didn't notice anything or anyone. I don't remember what I was thinking, but I certainly didn't have it in mind then that someone with ill malice against me was out to get me. But it turned out someone with exactly that was, because suddenly out of nowhere, someone pressed cold metal on my back and said, "Do not move," just like in a movie. I was scared and stood there transfixed. My brain froze, not knowing what to do or think. Before I could gather my thoughts, a bright white van advertising a popular cleaning agency parked by our side. The back door flew open, and I was asked to get in. Before I got in, however, a black cloth was put on my face and I was thrown into darkness. We drove for a while to a location I could not discern, taking routes that seemed to me unnecessarily complicated. Then I was asked to get down. I was taken to a small, nondescript room where I was cuffed and told to remain there, nice and quiet. They didn't bother to remove the face cloth. Throughout my stay, I never saw their faces. Thus began the most arduous 5 days of my life. At first, I had no clue what to say or do, but eventually some thoughts began to coalesce. My initial fear that they were going to kill me seemed to wane as I realized if they wanted, they would have done so since. And so it seemed the only possible option was that I was being held for ransom. But why? It made zero sense. I was not some billionaire or an executive officer at a bank. Sure, I made a nice bundle, but that doesn't change the fact that overall, I wasn't spectacular enough to deserve something like this. Later, over the years, I would come to realize that my lax security habits made me a very easy target, and the kidnappers just wanted to make a quick buck off me. Then, it just didn't make any sense. And so my kidnap experience began. On the first day, my palpable fear led all of my bodily function to work overtime. The kidnappers dealt with that, were, if nothing else, efficient. Each time I banged on the door and told them that I had to go, someone came to open the door, unchained my hands, and led me with a cold gun pressed in my back to a small bathroom where I did my business. There was no question of me doing heroic stunts or defeating the kidnappers with my bare hands, though. I just wanted to get out of this mess alive. They told me I spent just 5 days in their hands, but to me, it felt like an eternity. I was fed just once a day on cereal and fruits. Once in a while, I would hear the din of a television set or a phone ringing, but other than that, it was silence. From the few times I was allowed to go out, I knew we were in the country woods somewhere, but I couldn't place my hand on the location. Occasionally, they would put a phone to my ear and a gun to my head in order to talk, and I talked. I didn't need to fake feeling fear. It was real enough. Day and night didn't matter to me. I was in darkness all through. Finally, after some time, 5 days they said, my kidnappers barged into my room. They uncuffed me, put a sleep mask on my face, and removed all of my clothes and put me in sackcloth. I was driven again to another location and told to keep walking. I didn't need a second reminder. I kept walking for a while until I heard a car driving off. I removed the blindfold from my eyes and ran. I ran for a while. Somebody called at me, but I fled from his sight. I think I was a bit wild at the time. Eventually, I stopped running and asked around for my directions. With a little help from a passerby, I found my way back home. I eventually learned that although my kidnappers demanded $100,000, it eventually cost $50,000 to free me. It was the worst experience of my life. Last summer taught us 3 things. Never trust your kid alone, summer camps are overrated, and humans are twisted creatures. It happened during the early days of summer. It was a Friday. School had officially been over for a while now, and we visited a family camp for vacation, my aunt's family and mine. We had a pleasant visit until it was time to go. All was set until my cousin didn't show. We went to the camp guard to report, but they just kept waving us away, saying he had gotten slightly lost and would come around, or something. It was an exasperating time. Finally, when my cousin failed to show up that day, they started taking matters seriously. That night, we gathered a couple of people together and went searching for him. Not only were there rumors of wild animals in the woods, Jason, my cousin, was sickly and couldn't spend long periods outdoors. Elena, his mother, was going into hysterics, worried about what he must be passing through. The search on the first day yielded no results, as well as the second day. On day 3, however, things began to happen. Strange things. First, we found some of his belongings bundled somewhere in the woods. Second, we received the classic "We have your son" letter. Only it was not so classic. It simply said $1,000 or else. Although the letter was addressed to no one, the very content scared us. It was written in a neat scrawl and postmarked 2 days ago, the time when our cousin had gone missing. We wanted to show it to the police, but logic convinced us not to. Local authorities were convinced it was a case of missing persons or something. No one even thought to consider kidnapping. It just didn't happen here. That was one of the factors we considered before choosing this place. The next day, a second letter came saying, $5,000. This is our final offer or we start cutting. It was mail that scared the crap out of us. We weren't rich, at least not that rich. What to do seemed impossible to tell. This time, we gave it to the local police authorities, who contacted the city police, and together they started a large search. The whole thing seemed straight out of a movie, like a nightmare. We had a family liaison officer come out to meet us. We had different people come over telling us to describe Jason, what he was wearing, the lot. It was a real strain on the family, especially his mom. She was the one who sent Jason out exploring. He was disturbing the peace of the camp. The next day, yet another mail arrived. $10,000. This is the last stand. The content introduced general consternation and palpable fear among us. While we were in for paying, the police advised caution and told us we needed proof he was actually in their custody before paying. What proof, we argued? Was it until Jason started losing body parts before we knew they were being serious? We were in the midst of the most heated argument when the most inexplicable thing happened. A search party came back home early. They were whooping with joy, and in their tow was my cousin Jason. We went running to the scene. Jason didn't understand what was happening. According to him, he had gotten lost and spent the next couple of days in a Good Samaritan's country home. We didn't take our phones with us, and he had forgotten the number of the rental we were in. He was on his way back when he met the rescue party. All of these explanations and others came later, though. Right then, we were just happy he was alive. The next day, another letter came saying, $15,000 and that's it. Do you want your son or a body bag? We read the sick note and chuckled. Jason himself tossed it in the fire. That right there was without a doubt the scariest false kidnap encounter we had ever had.